Welcome to On the Legal Side, the podcast that deciphers clients' issues of a 360 degrees business law firm. My name is Philippe Durand. I am a partner with August Debouzy, and I will be your host today. It is here at the heart of the firm that I hand the mic to its legal experts to hear their views on the issues that are crucial to the organizations and the managers they assist on a daily basis. Enjoy your listening. The Obsolescence of Humankind was published by Günther Anders in 1956. This German philosopher and journalist died in 1992. Anders' philosophy has become increasingly attractive to scientists and to philosophers, and apparently to lawyers as well. His books seem to read as if he was able to foresee the emergence of artificial intelligence, whose presence in our lives was confirmed by the massive publicity given to Chat GPT. But of course, like a philosopher, one should question the benefits and the drawbacks to be expected from artificial intelligence. And once this assessment and this selection have been made, in order to keep only the good part of it and protect us against the bad one, the next question that comes up is how to regulate artificial intelligence. To answer that question, I'm pleased to welcome Marc Mossé on this program today. Marc is a lawyer with a rich and diversified career. He started as a counsel to Mr. Badinter, former Ministry of Justice, while the latter was a senator in the 90s. And then Marc joined our law firm in 2000. A few years later, he left us to join Philip Morris as a general counsel, before joining Microsoft for many years until 2022, where Marc was also acting as GC, Europe being part of his last scope of duties there with Microsoft. Marc finally made the right decision to come back to our firm last year, but this time as a senior counsel. Apart from teaching digital law, cybersecurity, data strategy, and platform regulations at the Aix-en-Provence University, Marc has a passion for theater, literature, and philosophy. He was a theater student at the famous Cours Florent for 3 years, when he was a bit younger, but that passion doesn't seem to be extinguished. As for literature and philosophy, I will testify here that Marc has a special gift to share his attraction to writers like Günther Anders. So let me simply say that I am grateful to Marc, who convinced me to read that German thinker when I am retired. Frankly, this is the most that Marc could do. Hello Marc, how are you doing today?
I'm very fine. Hello Philippe.
Marc, let me start with a pretty generic question. How would you define artificial intelligence for our audience?
Very good question, and quite difficult question. There is a lot of definition. I would say, for example, AI is a technology aimed at solving problems currently reserved for humans. Beyond the definition, I think it's super important to keep in mind that AI is a combination of three very important elements. The first one is data, big data, and I would say smart data. The second element is the power of computing. And this is why cloud computing is so important. And the third element, key element, is the sophistication of algorithm, smart algorithm. And AI is mainly based on this combination of elements. You need to understand this. And of course, for the company, for the users that will use AI, they need to have this in mind to be sure they will integrate usefully, helpfully, these services based on the AI.
Marc, do you think that Chat GPT would be a simple illustration or an example of artificial intelligence, or is it something different? Is it something else?
Chat GPT, now Chat GPT 4 already, is a very good example of AI. What is really remarkable with Chat GPT is that this is the democratization of the AI. We knew AI before, but with the massification of the use of Chat GPT, we'll go in a new step.
So new step, new trend, new development. That's what you're explaining. But how would you explain this vast media coverage and publicity that was recently given to Chat GPT 4, as you rightly said?
I would say maybe because there is a fascination for AI. It's not new. And in fact, we are using AI for a while. But I've been impressed by the ability of this technology to offer very creative answer and to propose a kind of dialogue, which is something new. It's not only a question and an answer, but a question and answer and a kind of development of a discussion between the machine and me.
2023, Marc, seems to be a proper time for precise legislation to emerge to regulate artificial intelligence. For example, in the US, no federal AI regulation exists at the moment, despite various state laws that were passed in California, Virginia, Connecticut, Colorado. But we expect that such federal regulation should be coming up in 2023 from the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States. Before we talk about the anticipated EU regulation on artificial intelligence, could you explain to me, Marc, the two different approaches that potentially exist to regulate artificial intelligence? My understanding is that we have here a risk approach versus a fundamental rights approach. Could you elaborate a little bit on this?
When you talk about AI, the first thing that you have in mind is how the machine will respect fundamental rights. This is the first question. And this is not only a relevant question, this is a crucial question because AI should be human-centric. At the same time, there is another question, which is how to foster innovation and how to use the AI to leverage the economy and to suggest new progress for humanity. And this is where you need a kind of approach that strike a balance between fundamental rights and innovation. And the risk-based approach is one of the ways to conciliate the two objectives.
On its own side, the European Union published a draft regulation on artificial intelligence in April 22, a sort of Artificial Intelligence Act. That's the name given to that regulation already, although it's not effective yet. How would you describe the general approach that this draft EU regulation is taking? It is more based, I think, on a risk approach. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right, Philippe. This is a risk-based approach. And again, this is really the idea to strike the balance between the fundamental rights and the possibility to innovate through the artificial intelligence. This approach, which is still under discussion at the EU level between the Parliament and the Council, is based, I would say, on a kind of categorization of the usage of the AI. You have four categories. The first is the usage which is unacceptable towards our European values. We cannot do it. You cannot provide this kind of usage. Just take an example, the facial recognition in public spaces or the social scoring, as we know in other countries such as maybe China. The second category is the high-risk system. You can provide this system, but you need to have some safeguards in terms of compliance and transparency. And there is a lot of duty for the provider of this high-risk system. The third is the low-risk system, which is mainly about transparency for the provider, and the system with no risk. And here, you don't have regulation under this act, but you will have to respect, for example, the GDPR on privacy or NIS directive on cybersecurity.
If we bear all this in mind, Marc, could you summarize for me the most salient provisions of that draft EU regulation?
If I had to pick one provision, I would say the chapter applying to high-risk system, which is really about compliance for the provider. You need to be able to manage the system. You need to be able to explain the system. You need to be able to have a control by humans on the system. This is really a mix of due diligence, compliance, and transparency.
Well, it will be interesting to see if all those provisions, and for example, the very last example you were giving, will be maintained in the final version. If we think for 2 seconds about our clients, about companies, how do you think they should get prepared and ready for this Artificial Intelligence Act?
It's a very, very, very interesting question. I would say this is the paramount of digital transformation. It means that for the company, you need to have an organization in place. You need to have multidisciplinary teams, including lawyers, compliance officers, engineers. It depends, of course, of the company, but you need to put in place teams that can manage this innovation. And for a lawyer, of course, we have some interest for the lawyer. It's important to maybe assess the contract and how you can integrate AI in your business through the contract, how you can avoid liability when you are using AI in your offer, in your product, in your services. And I think it's super important, in particular because the EU is also drafting a regulation for AI liability. And it's also very important to ensure that you will put in place all the mechanisms, again, through a pluridisciplinary approach to manage the usage of the AI. Because what we are talking about is not only the technology, it's even more the usage of this technology.
And Marc, if you think in terms of documentation that companies should think about or maybe set up right now, what would you say to that?
I would say first, it depends if the company is a provider of AI system or a user of AI system. So, of course, it will impact the way they work on all this. If you're a provider of AI system, it's, of course, extremely important that you have this documentation in place because you could be in trouble with the client, with a kind of a liability case. And it's extremely important that you can provide the evidence on how you have dealt with your system and showing you have taken all the prerequisites to ensure that this system comply with the law, with the regulation. So documentation is clearly extremely important, not only the technical, but including the process and how it has been built. If you are a user, I would say that this is also important that, again, in your contract, you have some provision about the usage of AI, but also some code of conduct for your employees and for your customers to be sure that the technology is used in the proper manner. Because, again, we are not talking about only technology, but also about the usage of the technology.
I was talking earlier about these local state laws in the US. Those laws are actually a mix between privacy laws, AI regulation. Since such laws regulate automated decision-making, that's another definition that we could give about AI, by the way, and those laws are strongly inspired from EU regulation on GDPR, which you were talking about a few seconds ago, Marc. And speaking of EU GDPR and the strength that this regulation has had now all over the world, I was thinking of a recent headline in a US magazine that was saying the EU wants to become the world's largest super regulator, I would say, in artificial intelligence. Do you think this may happen?
We have an expression in Brussels, which is the Brussels effect. And this Brussels effect shows that even before the GDPR, the EU regulation had some impact across the globe. It's clear that on privacy, GDPR set international standards. On AI, it would not be surprising that we have the same kind of consequences. But there is something to me which is extremely important to keep in mind. When we talk about AI, privacy, cybersecurity, we are talking about our value, our common democratic value. And what we are seeing today is the need to have a dialogue, a strong dialogue, even when we disagree, between the EU and the US, because we have in common this democratic value. And when you talk about AI, to be sure that the human will control and manage the technology, we need to work through this value, and they are not the same all over the world.
Marc, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today about artificial intelligence and its future, particularly as part of that future EU regulation we talked about, this so-called Artificial Act that will come soon in the EU scope. You obviously support the idea of the risk approach that you detailed for us. And to paraphrase my guest, I would say that the EU legislation should not stop the wave, but it should teach us how to surf. And Marc, I know you are quite optimistic about the political and legal power that the EU should be able to benefit from this kind of war regulation between the US and the European Union. This is certainly a topic to be watched in the coming years by all of us. You have been listening to On the Legal Side, a podcast brought to you by August Debouzy. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you would like to be notified of future episodes, do not hesitate to subscribe from your favorite podcast platform. And if you would like to know more about our law firm, its teams, and its news, please connect to our firm's website at www.august-debouzy.com or see the connection details in the description of this episode. This audio series was conceived, written, and produced by August Debouzy with the support of Aparté Studio and Le Son de l'Encre. See you soon.